for them it's not that important to have short maintenance periods. But if you have this big e-commerce website with hundreds of financial transactions a minute, then you will lose a lot of money if your website is down for maintenance for 5 minutes. So what you want is that you take less time for this maintenance, so you lose less money. Now, better structure, not just readability, but also your code structure is also better for maintenance. So if you want to refactor to put in a better structure, that will help as well. And also, if your code is easier to understand, more readable, more maintainable, it is usually faster and has a higher quality, because everyone can understand the code, and if you understand the code, you know what is working and what isn't. Now, if you have readable code and it's well structured, that means it's also easier to extend the code, to change the code, or to implement something. If you have existing functionality, you can easily extend that without changing the existing functionality. And the internal logic can also be changed easier with refactoring. An example of this is if you have a user authentication then that authenticates against a MySQL database, for instance, it is very easy to change that to, for instance, use LDAP instead. And also you can implement dummy classes that do nothing yet, but you can call it already, and then implement the actual logic later. So there are a lot of ways to use refactoring in your projects. But is it the holy grail of change? No, I don't think so. There is not really one single holy grail of change. Refactoring is not the best way for all changes. I do think that you should try to refactor as much as possible, but it is not always possible. Whenever you come into a situation where you need to change the code, go into that situation with an open mind. Try to think, what are the options here, and then decide what to do. Do you want to refactor, or do you want to rewrite your code? Now, the definition that Wikipedia gives on rewrite is this. Again, I'm not really going into the actual definition, but the main difference between rewriting your code and refactoring your code is that with rewriting your code, you can break your existing API. And with refactoring, you make sure that the existing API will remain the same. So let's compare the two a bit. Refactoring versus rewriting. First of all, when you come to this situation where you need to change something, take a step back. Look at the code that you have and think, do I have to break my existing API or not? Take your time to decide, because this is a fundamental thing for you to do. If it is possible to refactor, and you should refactor whenever possible, then it will save you a lot of time. If you have a big change, try first putting it into smaller units and see if you can do refactoring, apply refactoring to those smaller units, so you don't have to rewrite. And if at that point you still cannot make the change without breaking the API, then go ahead and start rewriting your code. As I said before, take some time to do this, because if you refactor, usually this saves you a lot of time as opposed to rewriting. So don't take this decision in 5 minutes. Refactoring takes a lot less effort, as I said before, and having refactoring take a lot less effort is nice for you, for your manager, and probably for your client as well. And it is better for the quality of your work. Breaking the API with rewriting is more work. Why? Well, you have to ensure that all the code that is calling this piece of functionality that you are rewriting, you have to ensure that all this calling code is changed as well to use this new standard. You have to update all your unit tests, and you have to update your documentation as well. So aside from just focusing on this small change that you need to make, you also need to step out of this context and have a look at what else is calling this and change your unit tests. So refactoring is not the holy grail, but it is something to use whenever you can. Refactoring is a tool that you can use during development, but it is not a goal in itself. So whenever you come into a situation where you need to change something, do some research on your own code. If you then in the end start rewriting your code, that's okay, but it should be a conscious decision to start rewriting. And it should be automatic to try to refactor first. Now, there are some requirements for successful refactoring. Refactoring is not something that you can do just like that. These requirements are, for instance, that you know your code base well. Because if you change something, you need to know in your head at least that if you change this, what areas of your code base will that affect? You need to have a structured API, so you need to make sure that whatever you have already is important in this is that refactoring will not replace your design decisions. You should not just go ahead and do the cowboy coding that Ivo was talking about earlier. You should still think about the design. Actually, you should maybe think more about your code design because your API needs to support refactoring. You need to think that if I do it like this, will I be able to change something later without breaking what is already there? And another thing that is very important for your quality assurance is unit testing. Unit tests will check your API and will see if it works or not. So for refactoring, unit testing is very important. So let's look into these points. Code-based knowledge. If you get a change request from your client or your internal client, or you think yourself, this needs to be changed, if you know your code base well, you know what you want to change very quickly. You don't have to search through your code to see what to change. And as I said before, you need to be aware of your changes and the impact that your changes have on other parts of your application. Now if you do refactoring, this impact should be, well, there should be no impact because you only change this small unit. But you need to know for sure that there is no impact on other parts of your code. Now, as you mentioned before, refactoring does not replace the design. And this is a point that I cannot stress enough. You need to think about your code structure, your architecture, stuff like that, before you start coding your project, before you even start writing the first letter of code. You need to think about, okay, how am I going to set up this application? And the API that you set up needs to allow these internal changes. And a good way to do that is to keep all the units as small as possible. Because if you have small units that are responsible for very small parts of the functionality, it's very easy to just change this unit or replace this unit with something else. without affecting the rest of the application too much. This also means that extending is easier because you can very easily add a new small unit that can be used by your application. Now, another important thing